The Van Meter Monster, or Van Meter Visitor, just a stone throw's distance from Des Moines, Iowa, was a seemingly average day in Van Meter back on September 29th, 1903. However, the creature known as the Van Meter Visitor would radically alter the average day and the nights of Tuesday, September 29th through October 3rd, and would add terror, shock, and the sound of giant wings flapping across the sky. We're going to dive into this 100-year-old tale that, by some accounts, are saying may have returned tonight.
This is a weird little beast.
Weird little beast.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
All right, before we get too far into this, I want to acknowledge that I've either plagued myself with seasonal allergies here or I've picked up some kind of cold, so I'm not going to quite sound like myself.
Bill sounds a little nuffy. Got a little Arnold Schwarzenegger sound going on there.
And we do 3 of these every time we get together, so it's going to sound like I'm sick for the next month. Rest assured that if I am still sick in the month, then there's something seriously wrong with me.
Nearly dead.
Hopefully after these 3 episodes, I'll be back to my regular self. Eric, we're going to talk about this Van Meter. I know they say visitor quite a bit when they talk about him.
The Visitor, I believe, is a new book that's actually being put out. So that's kind of, beforehand, I think it was the Van Meter Monster, and it's kind of been reintroduced as the Van Meter Visitor.
I think visitor was used because, if I remember correctly, and I've looked this up, allegedly the creature never attacked anyone.
Allegedly.
It never directly attacked anyone. It never seemed to cause anyone any harm. It did interact with people on a couple occasions, and as we tell the story here, I mean, people certainly intended harm to the monster.
Well, it seems to be a stereotypical, whenever we have a creature, and we've laughed about this on several podcasts, if you don't know what it is, you just try to shoot it. I mean,
this is America.
Yeah.
So, if you got a gun, you should use it, right?
Several times and very often, yes.
So we're going to say visitor and we're going to say monster. Now, I, being a creature person, I'm going to say monster a lot. And I'm going to say, as we go through here, if you've got a 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons monster manual...
Oh, here's the D&D plug again. Wizards of the Coast does not sponsor us, by the way.
Yeah, if you've got a 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons monster manual floating around and you look up the Yrthak, Yrthak, I think it's very similar to what we're seeing, what we're describing here when we talk about this creature. I'm going to show Eric what it looks like on my phone so he can agree or disagree.
I'm sure I've seen it. I have many of the D&D books, but... I
would think it's similar.
I think that's pretty similar.
And then, but anyway.
Some wonder, is it a prehistoric flying dinosaur, similar to a pterodactyl in many aspects. However, some stories dive in a little bit more with a demon, possibly, that literally has clawed its way up from hell through the coal mines that's in that vicinity.
If we're going to talk about Van Meter, we need to talk about Van Meter.
Van Meter.
So Van Meter is a city in Dallas County, Iowa, and it sits on the Raccoon River. Population was only 1,484 during the 2020 census. So as you can imagine, it's not a very big town.
I don't think it was a lot larger or changed in the time of the 1903 incidences.
At the time of the visitors' visit,
visitors' visit,
the population was said to have been just over 400.
Not
a very big place.
Okay.
And the town itself was named for Jacob Rhodes Van Meter and his family, some of the original Dutch settlers in the area.
Okay.
But the time frame I think we're going to really focus on, because this is sort of the bulk of the Van Meter visit, is from September 29th through October 3rd.
Now, I want to say one thing here that, in my mind, I actually was channel surfing one night and came across one of my favorites. I'm always looking for sci-fi shows and stuff. But this pterodactyl demon-like creature has a horn or something growing out of the top of its head. And the thing that really set this apart to me is it like shoots a beam of light, almost like a sci-fi scanning beacon type deal?
It's definitely like you could make a Dungeons and Dragons monster. And
Oh,
you can
absolutely.
List the abilities. What I have here, which is just a rough description of it, is a winged bat or pterodactyl-like creature. Was roughly 9 feet tall, moved impossibly fast. When it did make a noise, it sounded like someone strangling or suffocating.
I heard that. Yeah, that'd be pretty scary in the middle of the night.
Apparently, it could emit a memory-erasing stench.
I heard that. Yeah,
So-
like a stench, like a skunk or
Yeah.
some spray or pheromone.
And seemingly unaffected by bullets. Because basically everybody that saw this thing took a shot at it.
The last night, I guess, when they ran this thing back to the mines, there was just an arsenal of people waiting and just emptied round after round after round.
And that absolutely makes sense after you've shot at it every night for 3 nights and it
Yeah.
has no effect.
Let's pump up the volume a little bit here.
So I said September 29th through October 3rd. That year would have been, what year is that?
1903.
1903. I'm sitting here looking at my notes and I left out what year happened. So I'm not really, I'm off my game.
It was a far piece back, Bill. I don't expect you to remember back that far. Well, I think the first event took place downtown, right in the heart of the city's business district. And as you said, I use those words loosely. There was like 400 people in population. There were many credible witnesses throughout the 3 days, but this one incident...
Well, here's the thing. Strangely enough, almost all of the named witnesses to the event were like important men in the town, business owners,
shop
doctors,
owners, yes.
bankers, the kind of people that most of the time would not want their name associated with something like this.
Right. And it made quite a hoopla, if you will. There was a U.G. Griffin, I believe, at least the research I've done, he was the first person that actually experienced the Van Meter monster.
He was the local, and I'm going to say this in quotes because I don't know exactly what it means. I'm going to assume it means he owns some kind of hardware store or something, but the local implement dealer.
Implement dealer. Okay.
And this was on the night of the September 29th.
September 29th, and I think it was early morning, like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., something like that.
I think this was, and again, we may be off. My impression was this was the night of September 29th, and then the next encounter I have is early morning on the 30th.
Okay.
So I think this might have been the night before, and then...
Well, U.G. Griffin was the first person believed to have actually experienced the Van Meter monster. Initially, he thought it was a spotlight moving around the rooftop and woke up and annoyed, ready to confront whoever was behind it. Now, you got to consider at this time frame, some might say, well, it's somebody with a flashlight on the top of the building. Flashlights were around. They were actually invented, I believe it was in 1898. They were starting to be sold in the 1903 era, but again, the quality, the brightness definitely would not match what he described.
Well, every time they talk about the light of this creature, it's described as a beacon.
Like a lighthouse,
like,
blinding.
Very bright.
Like something we would have today in technology with flashlights. But he noticed the light move from a rooftop to a rooftop. In his opinion, it jumped
across streets.
Yes, across the entire street. So you got to think that's at least 20 foot, maybe 30 or even more feet. But he felt it was leaping from rooftop to rooftop across the street. And again, this beacon light kind of scanning through stores, scanning the street. And then it just, as quickly as he saw it, it just disappeared in the night.
Well, Mr. Griffith did, of course, take a couple shots at it.
Well, of course.
Which the beast seemed to shrug off like, mosquito bites or whatever. Like, it seemed to have no effect. And I will say, as we continue, every time that this beast gets shot at by anyone, it leaves behind no evidence that it's injured.
No blood.
It doesn't appear to be injured.
No tissue.
No
nothing. Now, some might ask, well, what in the world was U.G. Griffith doing out in the middle of the street at 1 a.m.?
Now, from my understanding, he was making some rounds, like maybe acting as a security guard for his property or something like that. That was my impression.
Okay. I had heard he had returned from a business trip. So I'm envisioning, and I didn't find this, maybe the train had come in or, he rode his horse in or whatever the case may be. But it was business of some sort.
Yeah.
But, he wasn't, by any account that I saw, he wasn't had been to the tavern all night long and was, it wasn't like he was inebriated and drunk wandering the street.
Like I said, a lot of the people that they say saw it were respectable members of the community. So, and again, I'm not saying respectable community members can't go out and get liquored up, but no, there's never any documents of like, oh, this guy was drunk and he saw this thing. So later that same night, early morning on the 30th, I have the Dr. Alcott.
Yes.
Town's doctor.
The town doctor.
He was awoken by a piercingly bright beam of light shining through his window.
And I believe he lived on the second floor,
I think so.
Kind of setting the pace here.
So, of course, he jumps out of bed and he grabs the nearest firearm that he can. Because, again, we're Americans and we have guns everywhere.
That's absolutely what we do.
And he was concerned that they were trespassers somehow, Again,
maybe shining a flashlight or, whatever, lantern or whatever.
Break into his place. So he ran outside where he was confronted by the Van Meter monster standing there in all of its pterodactyl-like glory.
And it was like stuck on the side of the building, I believe. Like maybe it was peering into the window, possibly.
Yeah. So he takes 5 shots at the creature. He's going to drive it off, whatever it is. And again, there's no evidence that he injured it. There's no blood on the ground. The creature flies off as if it's perfectly unharmed. So then, of course, the doctor does what any sane man at that point does. He goes inside and he locks up all the doors, and he just waits out for daylight because he doesn't want to deal with this.
Clutching the gun in a wet sweat, hoping the night passes through. Yeah.
So next night, I think we have the bank cashier, Peter Dunn.
Yes. I had a Clarence, so it may have been Peter Clarence or Clarence Peter
I think
or something like that.
I think he has 3 names. I had seen references to a Clarence Dunn and a Peter Dunn, so I think it might have been like a Clarence Peter Clarence situation. But apparently he heard something outside, and this is where you the first document of the creature's noise, which he described as sounding like someone was choking or gasping for air. Now,
very unusual.
He was a little more, I would say, of a common sense kind of guy because he basically just kind of held his ground where he was and was kind of scared.
He just kind of locked himself in his bank. Obviously he felt threatened or the business, was going to get broken into.
So he kind of hunkered down and stood his ground and obviously armed as everybody was in this story. And then suddenly the night was pierced by a bright beam of light shining through the front of his bank. And that's when he, of course, takes the reasonable measure of shooting at the monster through the front window of the bank.
And I thought that was interesting. I mean, again, you've got not that glass is cheap today by any means, but especially back in that time frame, a picture glass front window of a store, he didn't think twice. He shot right through that. Now,
Dunn was able to make plaster casts of the footprint of the beast, which is here in quotes, great 3-toed tracks that it left behind. So,
now, I know you're kind of a dinosaur guy. Let's play the pterodactyl aspect. Do pterodactyls have 3 toes? Is that common, or do you know?
I mean, that's something I'd have to look up. But I will say, based on my understanding of biology, pterodactyls do not have any sort of spotlight on their head. Right.
Unless somebody has duct taped a flashlight to it.
Now, I will say, if you look at some early art of the creature, there's some art, renderings of witnesses. But apparently there was also on a newspaper cover a drawing depicting this thing as something like a dragon and flying off with cattle, which is never documented anywhere in the story.
I believe I did see that, yep.
So even amongst the people that saw it, they kind of, and again, I think not that long ago we talked about that yellow journalism where they punch up a story a little bit. So
got to sell newspapers.
So the night after Peter Dunn sees the creature, we go to an O.V. White. And every account that I saw said the same thing. O.V. White was a deadeye with a gun.
I saw that as well.
If he put his sights on something, he was hitting it.
It was going down. Yep.
So he was awakened from his slumber in his quarters above the hardware store by what he described as a shrill metal-on-metal grinding-like sound. So not the gasping for air, but kind of a monstrous shriek, if you will. He, of course, grabbed his rifle and he looked out the window, and that's when he sees the creature perched on a telephone pole across the street.
And I think that I envision this as it's just perched up there, just resting, trying to get a break, and here again.
Yes, and of course.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, of course you can't have a monster perched on your telephone pole. That's, so he does what any good sharpshooter is going to do. The creature looks at him suddenly. He's looking at the creature, and before he can shoot at it, actually, based on my version of the story here, he claims to have been overwhelmed and knocked unconscious by a horrific stench.
This scent gland or pheromones or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so the beast has a smell, and again, they say it's memory altering in different accounts.
Now, I had the creature, and I thought this was dead on. Not that I saw it, but I loved the description, was like a parrot walking down a perch.
Yes.
Using its beak to kind of help steady itself.
The next guy who saw the creature was the next guy. Sidney Gregg.
Okay.
He was sleeping in his store nearby when he heard the disturbances of this. And so he gets up and he looks out the window and he sees the creature climbing down the pole. And it is exactly like you said, like the way you see a parrot using its beak to help it down.
And we've owned a parrot, so I know, I mean, as soon as they said that, I just...
Yeah, I have friends who owned birds when I was growing up. I've seen
totally see
the
that.
bird doing it. So he says that when the monster hit the ground, though, it hopped around like a kangaroo, which again is very bird-like.
Yes.
And apparently it sort of hopped around in the area, kind of surveying its surroundings for a moment before it kind of takes a couple of hops and then launches itself into the air and flies off.
And again, putting this into the pace of things, it seems to be a common 8 foot tall-ish, so you'd think the wingspan would be at least that much.
Yeah, everything I read was 8 to 9 feet tall, and so yeah, you imagine it's got a pretty good wingspan on it.
Now, again, some people might be reminiscent here as possibly some stories of the Jersey Devil. This kind of reflects the Mothman we've talked about in similar podcasts.
I did see where some folks said it could possibly have been inspired by the Spring Hill Jack story from Europe at the same time frame. And Spring Hill Jack is one I think we have on the list, as an eventual topic.
Mm-hmm.
On the evening of October 3rd, J.L. Pratt Jr., who was manager of the brick and tile factory on the outskirts of town, heard some strange noises coming from the nearby abandoned coal mine. And, if you've got a spooky story with a monster, I think it's mandatory to have an abandoned coal mine somewhere around.
In an or like an old brick, creepy background there next to it.
The Mothman story has something like that.
Yep.
But around 1 a.m., he noticed these sounds, and this coal mine's located on the northwest side of Van Meter. So J.L. Pratt described, in his own words, presently the noise opened up again, as though Satan and a regiment of imps were coming forth for battle.
I loved that aspect. That guy should be writing for movies.
And that was a direct quote of his from the Des Moines Daily News on October 3rd of 1903. So he goes and he investigates the noise, and he comes face to face not with one creature,
but
with two.
Yeah.
There's a smaller creature, roughly half the size of the actual, the before mentioned Van Meter visitor. So, maybe
could have been an infant, or maybe the male or the female is just a slightly larger version of the same.
So between the two creatures, they lit up the area in a brilliant light as they flew away.
Again, that's 1950s, 60s sci-fi. I mean, I think I've even seen some magazine covers and comic covers that would have that type of a beacon with, or a light, a creature just with this beacon of light scanning.
And the thing is even if you were going to hoax it, in that time frame, people don't you don't have any kind of technology where you can fly off into the air.
No,
you could do that with a drone or something now, but in 1903,
still pretty primitive. Like I said, flashlights and stuff were invented. They weren't, I won't say readily available, but the technology there was no way there.
So the locals took up arms and formed a posse that night.
And they're thinking that this is definitely where they're coming from, because the one guy had saw the demons and clawing. So, they're going to come back, and we're going to be ready for them. Yeah,
they form a posse, they take up arms, and they return the next morning, gathered up to rid the earth of the creatures. And again, that night, the creatures do again return. And like any good, self-respecting posse with firearms... And we keep going back. We're Americans, so everybody has guns. I don't know if people have seen the meme where it's like, this is how Americans have breakfast, and steak and eggs and in a 9:45, sitting right there.
Well, I mean, you and I are old enough. We grew up in the time frame. Even when we went to school, it was not uncommon to see a shotgun or rifle in the back of a pickup.
No, when I was going to school,
or school
people
kids
absolutely brought guns to school on occasion. That shows how old I am. Because you get in trouble for that. But here's another very good quote from the time frame. The reception they received would have sunk the Spanish fleet, but aside from the unearthly noise and peculiar odor, they did not seem to mind it, but instead slowly descended the shaft of the old mine.
So, I mean, do these things have bulletproof armor? Is there some type of a shield? What?
You have to assume you have a variety of caliber, shotguns and rifles and handguns.
I'm envisioning at least 20-some people just firing away, emptying rounds. I mean, somebody is going to hit this thing in a key critical point.
Somebody's going to hit something. I mean, apparently they're immune to gunfire. Now, after the creatures disappear into the mine, everyone present immediately gets to work sealing the opening of the mine. They don't want to, take any chances with these creatures.
Well, and apparently the mine had kind of closed down anyhow. So and
of course they sealed up the mine, and the creature was never to be seen again.
Or was it?
They believed they'd sealed the mine up, and that they would never see the creature again. And I think it went for a good long time without anyone saying they had seen the creature.
I would say it even kind of got into the 2000s for sure, really before a lot of the stories came out.
I do have a story from the 80s.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't come across
there
that
were
one.
sporadic sightings of and I literally have Batman in my notes.
Batman.
Again, I was not in a good mind frame when I was doing this, I guess. Sporadic sightings of the Batman have happened since. No. So I do have a sighting from the 80s where a man who had just moved into the area and had never before heard the story of the Van Meter visitor was apparently walking near this coal mine when he saw a 5-foot-long bat-like creature coming out of the mine fly out over his head.
Once again.
So 5 foot, that's pretty big. I don't know the size of the local bats in that area.
I would not say they were 5 foot.
Well, I know our local bats don't get that big.
Nowhere near it.
And that's further north. So, but yeah, that was 1980s. And then you said 2000s, and that's where the rest of the reports that I have come from. So I don't know which ones you have.
Well, I just wanted to say there's a gentleman by the name of Chad Lewis who's actually recently put out a new book, and that's the book we kind of teased there at the top.
The Van Meter Visitor.
The Van Meter Visitor.
And a lot of the notes kind of come from his research, I think. Here.
And he's written like 15 plus books on just supernatural stuff. He's kind of like you and I, kind of interested in that type of stuff. There's some co-authors, a Noah Voss and a Kevin Lee Nelson, with the local librarian Jolena Walker. And so, yeah, he's really went back to the town. I'm thinking he must be semi-close to living in that region, because actually, if you go online, you can see him giving a tour, like in the last 6 months, a night tour, basically, and he's got 30, 40 people out there following him through the streets, and he's going to each one of the buildings where all the events took place.
And that's respectable for a creature that has like a 4-day lifespan in history.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely set a precedence with this town. But yeah, go on with some of the newer sightings, if you would.
Okay, somewhere in the early 2000s, a man and his family were driving home to Van Meter when they spotted what they thought was a giant bird-like creature dead on the side of the road, much larger than anything that should have been in their area. So he found a place to turn around, and when he came back to investigate said body was gone.
Body was gone.
In 2006, a pastor was waiting for his friend in Colfax, Iowa, when he spotted what he described as a dragon in the sky. So he goes home and he does what any good person's going to do. He Googled Iowa dragon when he got home, and the first picture he comes across is an artist rendering of the Van Meter monster. And that is almost identical to what he saw.
That's what I saw.
In 2014, a Iowa City College student and his girlfriend were walking through the park, kind of on a romantic stroll, when they encountered a creature similar to the Van Meter monster. That was documented on the TV show Expedition X, which, you know, I don't know if you've seen a lot of, I know you've watched it. Yeah. I've seen a few episodes of it.
It's a branch off of Josh Gates and Expedition Unknown. Kind of got his two friends that kind of go out and help him investigate stuff.
And then the last sighting I have, 2020, so, you know, last year, in Boone, Iowa, a person reported seeing a giant bird, and in quotes here, in their words, when it flapped its huge wings, all I could see was light, dark, and it was a huge whoosh, whoosh, whoosh that I heard.
Well, again, you got to imagine, you know, wings 3-5 foot. I mean, that's going to turn up some dust and some wind. Beast. But none of the incidences, we keep saying the word bird. There was no mention that, at least I saw, of any feathers. It's always like a leathery skin, definitely more pterodactyl.
Well, the artist rendering is very much a pterodactyl-looking creature, except for the horn and no discernible eyes in the pictures that I saw.
Yeah. Well, again, maybe you're blinded with this beacon of light off the horn and you can't see the eyes. Now, you had mentioned one of the incidences back in 1903. I can't remember if it was the bank owner had went out and cast some footprints.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those have all been lost.
Yeah, the author you were talking about, he's been trying to track those down without any luck.
And Chad Lewis, and he actually, and I believe Expedition X also tracked down what they believed was the mine entrance. Now, from what I am told, actually what I saw, the part of the old brick manufacturing place is still there. It's private property, so, you know, do not trespass. But they did believe they found the mine opening, and they actually even brought in some earth-moving material or machines and started digging up, and they found like where you would typically see like beams and stuff had been thrown. They did some sonar, basically scanning, but they didn't find a cave or the mine, it was
Yeah.
just fill, but they believe they did find that, so speculation totally is like, okay, well, if they collapse the mine, how are these creatures getting out? And the obvious thing is, well, there might be another opening
another
somewhere
exit to
else.
that mine somewhere.
One, again, it depends on with the rabbit holes and which one you choose to dive down. But one of the more interesting stories I got out of new lore was they believe the creature maybe like hibernates, if you will, for like 100 years and then resurfaces or eggs hatch.
We've got ourselves in a type situation.
Yeah. So,
well, I think at one point in time, one of the visitors described it as being devilish.
yes.
And, I have seen a devil-like creature, and, I know the good Lord exists, so this is proof that the devil exists.
Can't have one without the other.
Sort of a religious bent on it. I think one of the newer theories is now that this might be some sort of interdimensional or alien-type entity that would explain its super unusual, biology that
And that makes the most sense of the theories to me. I mean, I don't think, and we talked about pterodactyls and dinosaur sightings in one of our previous podcasts. North Carolina and Texas are hot spots. But again, this light beacon scanning thing, that's something totally different. The scent that stuns you, dazes you, maybe clouds your mind and, wipes your memory.
You can definitely see a listing in a monster manual with, memory erasing smell,
Yes.
blinding light.
As you said, it's like this was just ripped out of the pages of Dungeons and Dragons or something.
Well, to commemorate the sightings, Van Meter has a Van Meter Visitor Festival that happens every September. The festival brings in 300 to 500 people to Van Meter, which is respectable. And I think the guy who started the festival, he said he'd even be happy with 20 people. And again, you have an American beast here, and just spotted over the span of 3 days with a couple of sightings later on. And I have to, I know we do this podcast, we talk about strange and unusual, and I love the monsters. We talk about those all the time. I will say that I'm always skeptical of sightings that come way, way after the original sightings of like, oh, I saw this thing. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
We talk about the Mothman and people have shown pictures of, the giant horned owl. And you're like, oh, well, that definitely could explain the Mothman.
Herons, I believe.
The sandhill crane.
Cranes, and yeah.
So things like this where they're like, we saw a giant bird. I mean, I've seen, cranes in flight, and we see vultures and buzzards.
Starting to see a lot more eagles in this area. That's a big bird.
And I remember one time, going on a road trip with my grandmother and my mom, and seeing, a turkey vulture on a log over a carcass, and this thing was like full wings extended. I mean, that was a big old bird. So, I'm not saying people didn't see it. I just, when we jump ahead 100 years, there's always that. Did you really see it? Or
it's
did you
always
see something
easier
else?
to reinvent something that's already out there, especially in today's society where you have all the technology and internet.
We know people fake these kinds of things all the time. So again, is the Van Meter monster returned? Is it just unidentified, misidentified other, creatures?
Well, I will share one more story, and I may have talked about this on one of the other podcasts, but some good friends of ours, Robert and Liz Barker, we were out camping with my wife, Sarah, the four of us, and it was here in Missouri. I won't say where, but just a small distance from Lebanon. And we had to cross this large creek, small river, however you want to word it. It was pretty current-wise, and we dove or swam across it, waded across it. And there was a cave on the other side, and that's what we were trying to get to. We were spelunking, part of a spelunking group here in Lake County. And right probably 10 foot, maybe 15 foot into the opening of this, there was a big room. The acoustics, of course, you can imagine of a cave. I tell you, Bill, I have never been, I don't know if I would use the word scared. I was almost petrified of the sound that we heard when we went in this room. It was like you would imagine a demon hissing. It was so just blood curdling. Just I can't even simulate the sound I heard. All of us heard it. We just kind of stopped and looked at one another, like without saying a word. Did you hear that? Kind of thing. And everybody was kind of shook. We retreated immediately, being cool kids and age 20ish at the time. We kind of recollected our courage and thoughts, and I think Robert and I both went in first, and the girls followed behind us again. And I mean, just as soon as we would set foot in here, and again, this is right out of like Dungeons and Dragons, you hear this, kind of snake demon-esque type. And we did a little research. We never saw anything, but apparently turkey vultures often nest in like caves and stuff like that. And when they used the words that sounded like someone was strangling or whatever, that did kind of put me in the mindset of that. But again, turkey vultures around here can have a wingspan of 5 foot or more. I mean,
they're pretty good size.
They're a big, like turkey-sized bird. But again, if you heard one of these, I'm telling you straight up, I'm a pretty good-sized guy, and it takes a lot to scare me. But that had the hair on the back of my neck standing up. So
All right. Yeah, I mean, when you run into something like that,
what was that?
Similar story. A friend of mine, we were out late at night looking over a sinkhole, just kind of chatting out in the woods, And as we turned around to walk back to the car, there was something in the woods behind us, and we scared it. And I guarantee you, it scared us 10 times worse than we scared it. And my friend, a little eccentric, had a katana on him at the time, and that thing, I mean, he was like a samurai. That thing came out of nowhere, and he started whipping that sword back and forth. I jumped back because I thought, well, I'm going to lose
slices,
a limb.
it dices.
So yeah, I mean, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and you hear something out of sorts, so yeah, I mean, who knows what they saw back then, but maybe they're still seeing it now.
Is it a reinvention of the imagination, or is it something truly that's been lying dormant, for 100 years beneath the surface, and once again, it's crawled from the depths of hell to bring its wrath on Van Meter, Iowa? All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Bill and I try to get together and come up with interesting topics, and we try not to always go in the Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster, more general direction. We try to kind of hand select a few more of the obscure.
But Eric, those are my favorites.
Yes, and they are mine as well. Well, we hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. It's just another example of what you'll find on Nightmares on the Lost Highway. Thank you so much for listening. We'd like to give a shout out to our first paying sponsor, Raven's Loft. That's our family shop here located in Lebanon, Missouri. It's your one-stop gaming, vintage toy, and collectible shop where you can find Star Wars, Transformers, G.I. Joe, comics, vinyl records, role-play gaming, Magic the Gathering, and so much more. We're located here at 223 West Commercial, downtown Lebanon, and also in our second location, also here in Lebanon at the Heartland Antique Mall. We'd like to thank Raven's Loft for again supporting Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.